Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be around the globe. Thank you for joining us to this another episode of ISTAT Chats. It is our regular event where we pull together some great industry luminaries and talk about how they got into aviation, some of the adventures they had on the way to getting to today, and how they've managed through some of the previous challenges that the industry has presented. Today we have two great ladies, Pam Hendry and Shani Fisher, who have lived through some of the difficult times, especially around the financial crisis, and navigated it extremely well, and are currently managing some difficult issues that we're navigating through in terms of the pandemic. Pam has a very rich history of participating in some of the great businesses like ILFC, helping CIT transition to Avalon, and a number of others. And today she heads up treasury operations for the United Airlines. And Shani worked with Pam in helping to at ILFC, helping to transition that brand to AirCap and also to stabilize it during the financial crisis. And today, Shani has her own practice, legal practice, helping lessors and airlines structure financing and sale leasebacks and any of the legal issues that they may have. So with that, I'd like to bring on Pam and Shani and start with maybe having them talk about how they got into this space and what kept them in the space and some of the adventures they had on the way. With that, Pam and Shani, over to you.
Hello, nice to not see everyone, but virtually know that you're there. So my story begins as a typical Southern California girl story because I wanted to get into the entertainment business. So somehow that didn't happen, and I ended up in aircraft leasing. And it really was by mistake, but once I got into the business, and again, this was 30 plus years ago, working for a small aircraft leasing company where I was the 22nd employee. And what that allowed me to do was to do anything that needed to be done. You only had to say, I can do that, and you got to do it. And so working in an entrepreneurial environment and being able to see all parts of an organization, I was brought in to be the very unglorious job of assistant controller. But very soon, I started to do all of the treasury work, all of the investor relations work, and really branch out. And what has kept me in this business is the global nature of aircraft leasing and airlines broadly. What we know is that whenever anything happens anywhere in the world, whether it be something regional like a war or a hurricane or a volcano, or as we experience right now, a disease, no matter where it is in the world, it impacts our business. And so I think that has kept me interested and involved and really loving this industry. So Shani, I'll turn it over to you. You can share some of how you got into this business.
Sure. Great. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As Kostya said, it's great to be here. I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm on the good morning end of things. Similarly to Pam, my introduction to aviation was somewhat accidental. When I got out of law school and joined what was then known as the law firm of Fulbright and Jaworski, I was slotted into their finance group. And when I asked to relocate to New York, the best fit in New York was within the equipment finance and in particular the aviation practice there, where I just fell in love with aviation and aircraft and had some incredible and unique experiences, including being seconded to Emirates Airline in Dubai for 6 months, which was a very interesting 6-month period, given that it was November of 2007 to May of 2008. So for those of you who were in the industry at that time, that was a pretty interesting and critical time of sort of where things were changing, and also very good weather in Dubai for those months. That's the 6 months that I would recommend visiting Dubai and the UAE. Upon my return to New York, I worked for several more years at Fulbright in New York, and then was lucky enough to get an opportunity to move to Los Angeles, where my husband and I wanted to move our family, and to work in-house at ILFC with Pam, which was an extraordinary opportunity for a lawyer, I think, who's been groomed in the big law world to get to see what their clients' actual interests are. And that, clients aren't always interested in a lawyer fighting for 8 hours over what an indemnity clause is. They want to get the deal done. And ILFC certainly was a great training partner in teaching me as a lawyer how to operate that way and to get deals done. After staying at ILFC for some time and seeing through the transition of the evolution into AirCap, as Pam referred to it once, we're sort of on the roller coaster of this industry, and as she referenced all the various crises and shapes that it's taken over the past, over its history, really. At that time, I thought, I'm going to get off the roller coaster after I left ILFC and AirCap, and I'll maybe explore some other type of area of law that, has interested me from a personal level, or just sort of leave the roller coaster. Needless to say, I was very unsuccessful. And I think for me, the reason was the relationships within this industry are really unescapable. The relationships that I've been able to form at ISTAT events and just throughout my career of people across from me in deals or my clients made me realize I've been able to gain an experience in an industry and know people that there's too much here to walk away from it. So that's when I formed my own practice. And also very important, Kostya didn't mention this, but I also serve as counsel to Smith, Gambrell and Russell, which has provided a very unique opportunity for me to serve on larger transactions when needed, and then also in my private practice as well. So that's been my roller coaster ride to where I am now. And this is where I landed for now as we experience this really interesting cycle in the industry.
Shani, picking up on your comment on relationships, can you talk about a few people that stand out that could be viewed as either mentors or just the color or the light? Just like we talk about a teacher or two that we had in school, some of the people that you've encountered in the industry that made a difference and pulled you back.
Absolutely. Well, this is an easy one when I've got her on screen, but Pam was probably, I don't even need to say probably, she absolutely was the first female leader that I was able to work with and person in a management, first female in a management position, which for me coming up, it was just not something I had seen. And I didn't have a lot of guidance as far as making decisions in my personal life, again, about family and navigating those things. And meeting Pam and seeing a woman in such a position of power and who was so well respected. I mean, every time we got on a conference call to work on a deal, she had that infectious spirit, and it was fun to see. I think some young women coming up through the ranks, particularly in the legal sector, feel like they have to be very tough and very rigid. And Pam sort of burst all of those notions for me in a very positive way, which is you can be social, you can be funny, you can be still very smart and get all of the deal points that you want, and not have to be, a cold and icy person, which was incredible. So she's an easy example for me to give. Another category in a sort of a different category was that 6 months that I worked at Emirates. I made a very incredible relationship with who was a very junior attorney at the time and is now quite senior, a young lawyer named Mona, who was a local Emirati, who was also trained and qualified in England. She's still at Emirates and is an incredible female attorney, again, that I was lucky enough to work with. And that's been a relationship despite the miles and the years that I've been able to maintain. And at Fulbright in New York, I met some incredible lawyers who I continue to work with to this day. Mark Latman, who's a partner and on the executive committee of Smith, Gambrell and Russell, is absolutely the reason that I've affiliated with SGR, and who is just somebody who constantly is opening doors for people, even competitors. I've had people ask me, why is Mark helping me on this right now? We could be viewed as competitors. And I've said, that's just what he does. He likes introducing people. He likes making connections. He likes seeing other people succeed. Whether or not it actually benefits him in the long run is sort of beside the point. So those are some of the names that come to mind.
That's great. Thank you. Pam, the powerful leader that you are, who are some of the people that stand out in your life, whether mentors or a colorful presence?
It's really interesting you ask that. I never thought about who my mentor was until I realized that I never actually had a mentor. I was never so lucky as to be able to model myself after anyone. What I did do, and what I would suggest that everyone do, today certainly people have mentors, but even beyond that, and Shani talked about mentors for different parts of her professional career and personal career. I think that what people can do very easily is look at how other people are respected in the industry, who is listened to, who has the greatest impact, and take those qualities and sort of bring them internally. So I would say that I had that real opportunity, and I was very blessed to know Leslie Gonda, one of the original founders of ILFC. And for me, his professionalism, a true gentleman, very honest and forthcoming. The fact that he was a self-made man was something that I could admire and learn from. So he was absolutely someone that I held in high esteem and who I looked to for ways to sort of think about my life and business. And it's funny because I will still use some of his sayings today when I'm at work. And unfortunately, he told them to me in Latin, and I have no knowledge of Latin. So, one of my favorites is the eagle doesn't worry about the fly. I say that a lot because to me, that is really useful because you can spend all of your life comparing yourself to others, whether it's your business or your personal brand or whatever it is. But if you believe that you are sort of the best you can be, you're not going to worry about all of that noise and everything else that's surrounding you. You just sort of focus on soaring. I'm sure in Latin it was a much more eloquent thing to say. So other folks who, again, have had an impact on me, some of it is for better and some of it is for worse. But seeing how different people respond. I remember I was in a meeting many years ago, and it was always with a group of men. There were never any other women until Shani and others came along. But that was, obviously I'd spent more than 20 years in the business before there were any women that were on deals with me, with rare exceptions. And I remember one day there was this really big guy who was kept making a point in this negotiation. He was banging his arm on the table, banging, banging, banging. And I didn't think anything of it because, that was just a show of sort of strength. After the meeting, every other man made a comment about how threatening that guy was to them, that he was banging, banging, banging. And that was when I realized, I never really thought of that, but to other people, it was something that was incredibly upsetting. So, again, for better or for worse, sort of learning how to navigate this professional world. So, not quite a mentor, but I will say also that because I never had a mentor, it is incumbent upon me to be available to anyone who wants to chat about anything. And whether it's someone in my organization at United Airlines or outside of that, I am available. And so when the happy day comes, when we can all fly on United Airlines to the next ISTAT event, it's a double plug, okay? When we can do that, I would love for people to come up and say hello and just ask any silly question or any serious question, because that's how you make these connections at ISTAT or anywhere else.
All right. Well, these are great stories. And speaking of the pounding on the table, talk a bit about both of you, some of the toughest periods or transactions or moments that you had in your career. One or two that really stand out where you felt, gee, this may be cataclysmic or existential type of challenge.
So Shani, can I go first since I'm older than you?
Sure, go ahead.
September 11th was a devastating time for so many people, and it still has tremendous impact today. And it was really a moment of just so many terrible things that happened, but it also showed the strength and the resiliency of all of us in this industry. And one story that, basically what happened was when September 11th was happening, it was at the exact time that ILFC was renewing our revolving line of credit. And for those who know this business well, having that revolving credit facility is key to an aircraft lessor's survival. And because September 11th happened right in the middle of that, we had to delay the renewal and extension of our revolver. Now, all of the banks agreed to do that, but what that meant was in October of 2001, we all had to get on a plane and meet with all of our banks and basically beg for them to renew and extend our revolver. And so there I am on the dais with all of our banks, and on the dais with me is our CEO, our chairman, our president, our general counsel, and our CFO. And we have a presentation that we're going to make. And before I knew anything, they all looked at me and said, Pam, you're going to make this presentation. So here I am, the lowest person on the totem pole, basically being pushed out there for a do or die moment. And we were successful, obviously, but it really was an opportunity. And thank goodness I didn't know that I was going to be pushed out there, because otherwise I might have exploded before then. But having that opportunity to really tell the story and to convince people that our plan and this industry was resilient. And I think that speaks for today as well. Our industry is resilient and we are flexible, and we will come back because we're putting in place the protections and we're learning from these experiences. But certainly September 11th was for me a watershed moment for so many reasons, but that this industry can survive and thrive.
Great story. Shani, how about yourself?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, just what comes to mind, obviously, is what we're living through right now. So while 9/11 obviously affected all of us on a personal level, this current crisis affects us all on such a granular micro level. And literally the fact that, I'm balancing this conversation at the same time my kids are logging on to virtual school inside right now. So, and obviously then you have the repercussions for the industry as well, which, as Pam points out, we are a resilient industry. We've seen crises before that we've overcome. So I think at this point, it's really about navigating and figuring out how to constantly pivot and be able to serve. For me as a service provider, I'm trying to figure out in these unique situations how to provide services to my clients in ways that work for them given the current climate. So whether that's additional video conferencing, or whether that's thinking about more creative deal structuring or different deal considerations that we might not have thought about, 10 months ago. So this one, I guess I don't have an ending or a dramatic story to it yet, but I think it's probably what we're all feeling right now of living through this uncertainty. And, each day brings its new set of challenges and opportunities, I think, as far as our current environment and figuring out the best way to navigate them. And sometimes navigating them simply means putting one foot in front of the other and just trying to move forward until we get to the other side of this.
But you're not going to get off so lightly. We went from your history Rolodex, some of the super challenging moments where you were going like, "My God, this is a tough one." Is there one that pops out?
Well, so we've talked about Pam and I did worked on a huge deal together right at the time that ILFC and the AirCap consolidation was happening. And it was, I think, referred to as the largest term loan that had ever been done at that point in terms of the number of aircraft. We were taking, I think, something like 85 aircraft and putting in older aircraft and putting them into a term loan transaction, which took up massive resources, again, was something that was fairly unprecedented, at least at the time, all in the context of really massive organizational change. At the same time, we were all figuring out what the organization would look like after the AirCap acquisition. So that one certainly springs to mind. Again, it was right at the tail end of our time together at ILFC.
That's
so
great.
I'll do another one. Why not?
Okay. Yeah.
Also, during the financial crisis, that was basically when ILFC had to borrow money from the Fed, the US Fed. And so having folks lend you money who know nothing about your business and trying to explain to them how the world works. And, I think it is such a unique industry, and we're talking about such large assets that are mobile. And there's just so much capital that goes around, but it's a small group of players who are a part of it. And Shani talked about sort of when, she got into aircraft because it is a small bespoke industry. And so trying to convince the federal government of the value of aircraft and aircraft leasing was a huge challenge, and one that at some points in the process we didn't think they believed, and that was something to convince them of the value of our business.
I remember those stories. A lot of frustration in educating. Third graders are easier to explain things to.
Well, because they trust. The U.S. government wasn't as trusting.
That is absolutely true. That's a good observation. I often found that some of the most difficult moments in retrospect ended up being some of the most interesting ones as well. But are there times that were truly glorious market windows or market opportunities that stood out even at the time, that it was not dire straits, but extraordinary times that jump out from the story's perspective?
Wow. I mean, Shani talked about, I think that the market was resilient when we did our last term loan at ILFC, even though we were personally going through a lot of change. Thinking of just a great deal. I mean, certainly every time we were able to, I think that just pushing the boundaries of our markets is something that is useful for us to remember, that in good times and bad times, both, we should take the opportunity to try to push the envelope at least a little bit to make progress so that the next deal has maybe an additional bell or whistle that might be useful for us in the long term. And so doing that to me is what is, I think, the takeaway is in the good times, pushing out the realm of the possible. But I'll defer to Shani about anything specific.
I mean, as a sort of mid-level lawyer, I was coming up right when I got back from Dubai and going into the fall of 2008. At the same time, Pam was battling the federal government. I was battling a desk full of. There was a lot of work for lawyers, probably much to the dismay of many people in the industry. But it was a very busy time, and it provided really, I think, unique. I remember working on a couple of debtor in possession financings, for example, at the time, because there were some of the various bankruptcies that were working their way through the process. And I think, again, as Pam said, it sort of provided an opportunity for the industry to adjust and change and consolidate and grow. And it just was stressful in that there was a lot to do and a lot changing. And it felt like the ground was shifting under us, as it seems to in aviation. But I think maybe in retrospect, it was a really exciting time and really pretty pivotal time in the industry.
All right. Slight transition. This industry is full of metalheads that love airplanes, love to play with airplanes, talk about airplanes, airplane history. But over the last 2 decades, the industry has certainly diversified, where you have a lot of people that love the aspects that you've described, the global aspect of the business, the complexity and the interest of the transactions. Is either one of you a metalhead or that loves to snort jet fuel exhaust, or mostly interested in the global nature of the business and the types of structures and creativity that could be associated with that? Pam, do
All
you want to
right,
start?
I'll go first. You just brought back a terrible memory for me. So when I first started at ILFC, I would bet I was the first person who wasn't a metalhead. I did not. If you cut me, I did not bleed jet fuel. So I admit it. And what would happen is every day we would sit down for lunch in our lunchroom at our office. There were no real restaurants around. There was just a cafeteria in the building. So there was nowhere to go. And again, I was the 22nd employee. There was one other woman in management, our general counsel. And she also came through the industry. She had been at Flying Tigers before. So she was a real, she grew up in aviation. And so I would have to sit in that lunchroom every day and listen to people talk about airplanes and engines and spare parts and hush kits. And I just remember thinking, I don't even know why I'm here at this company. I don't know anything about this. I don't even know if I care about any of this. But then, I started to learn things. And then I got on airplanes and I started to know things about the airplane that I was on. So even though I didn't have that technical background and I mostly just wanted to cry every day, I had to sit there and listen to all of this at lunch, I started to have knowledge that made me sort of annoying when I got on an airplane for people around me. Oh, did you know that this is a Pratt powered 757, blah, blah, and start talking about it and things like that, where most people are not interested, but there is a cohort of folks who love this stuff. And so I began to be more appreciative of the information I had. But at the end of the day, it's all about the money and how you get the money and how you structure the deals. And that's the most fun for me. I like the big numbers, the big financings, but I also love being on an airplane, going places, visiting Boeing, visiting Airbus, visiting Embraer, doing all of that because it's fascinating and wonderful, and it connects the world. And so that is why I firmly believe in the longevity and the necessity and the opportunities for this industry going forward. So I'm a combo. Right. I'm a hybrid.
Okay. Shani, is your blood financial or jet fuel?
I think mine is pretty. I do love the smell of jet fuel. That is absolutely true. But I think my response is pretty similar to Pam's, but it does remind me of a funny story. as she's referenced before, the ILFC interview process is like a firing squad. So by the time you make it to an in-person interview, you are sat in a conference room, or you were sat in a conference room on a huge table across from anywhere from 4 to 5 people at a time who would come in over the course of a day and just spit questions at you. And it reminds me of sitting across from Marty Olson, who was the head of technical, and said to me, and he was a fairly intimidating figure in many ways. And, I'm coming from New York lawyer, I'm the paper person and mostly on the financing. And he's obviously very much a metal guy. And he asked me,
oh no.
Oh, mine. Oh, I'm back. Okay.
You're back.
He asked, there was a lot of buildup in this story. You saw it came to a very dramatic effect. So he posed to me what I could tell was going to be the critical question of this interview. And he said, all right, there's one thing that is the most important part of an aircraft that you can think of. Where is the value? What is most important? What should your eyes always be on? And thank God I said, not the galley carts, not the coffee machines, not the whatever, but I said engines. And I could tell that there was just relief that washed over me. And it felt like there should be confetti coming out of the sky or something. And thankfully for me, Marty did not ask many follow-up questions, which I'm not sure that I would have been quite as successful in my answers, but I did get the engine question right. So that was much relief to me. As far as other ties to aviation, again, it was fairly accidental, much like Pam's story, but it's also very contagious. When you're around metalheads, it's very fun to hear, I've got some metal data plates sitting on my desk that were taken off some aircraft that I had to do deals on. I've got some little, the bits of this is where you can tell my technical knowledge isn't great, but out of, the engine, yes, that thing. But my brother was also a B-1 pilot and went to the Air Force Academy. So that's been a fun sort of common, I've been up in planes with some, not in B-1s, but in some private planes with his friends who like to fly. And so that was sort of said to me early as well, but mostly coincidental.
Well, it's a good thing you were interviewing with Marty rather than the Boeing or Airbus. We think there are other important.
Yeah, sorry, Kostya.
Well, before we talk about our current predicament and how we're addressing the pandemic, talk a bit about, because you both lived through post-financial crisis, which was an enormously important and consequential predicament in the industry, especially the lessors, because of the liquidity associated or illiquidity associated with that crisis. So can you talk a bit about how you worked through that? And essentially, the two of you were instrumental in, first of all, addressing and ensuring the liquidity of ILFC through that period, and then transitioning the platform into a new home from AIG. So Pam, since you were there from the get-go, maybe you could start?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we learned is that we all, when we were coming out of the financial crisis, when we paid off the US government, the $3.9 billion that we owed them, plus we borrowed another $500 million just for fun. We then had to go about refinancing everything and putting us in the best position to either be sold by AIG, our parent, or to be held by AIG, our parent. But what we needed to do was stand up on our own 2 feet, because prior to that time, AIG never had guaranteed our debt, but there was always the halo when AIG was a AAA that gave us, positive halo. But when then they got into trouble, which they did big time, it then hurt us even more. So trying to separate ourselves from AIG was the first thing. So for me, it was always about being honest with our investors, with our lenders, with our bankers, but also being positive where we could, acknowledging the bad things that were happening, but also advising as to how we were going to get out of those bad times. So, one of the things that we did was diversify our funding. And in fact, we had to because we were no longer an investment grade entity. And so, from the standpoint of how do we fund ourselves into the future, because a leasing company is all about the money and how cheaply we can get the money. And so, diversifying and finding pockets of money, as Shani talked about the term loan that we did, that type of financing never crossed our minds when we were an investment grade company. We really used our corporate rating to drive all of our financings. After the financial crisis, now we're high yield. We now have to look at using our aircraft to provide us the liquidity that we need to go forward. And so, from that standpoint, we were very lucky that we had so many unencumbered aircraft that we could start to use them to provide the capital that we needed to move forward. Another deal that Shani and I worked on, which was very new and we only did once, was EXIM financing. In fact, for an Emirates, two Emirates, I think 777s. Up until that time, we had done ECA financing for our Airbus aircraft, but we had never done EXIM financing. And it took a long time, but we finally did. So again, diversification was the key as we came out of the financial crisis to make ourselves as attractive as possible for whoever was going to own us. So I think that to me was how we basically got through that time.
Mm-hmm. Shani, how about yourself?
So during the actual financial crisis itself, that was a little prior to my time of joining ILFC. So I was on the sort of flip side of it, again, as a service provider at a law firm. And in New York, it was, I think, I remember those times, in addition to being busy because there was a lot happening in aviation, but not entirely dissimilar to what we're feeling right now. It just, the world felt very unknown. So and we had a lot of close friends, social friends, and friends from law school who weren't sure whether they would have jobs the next day. I remember a friend in finance who I consider to be very smart and have a good crystal ball on what was coming, talking about, I've got to sell my house on the West Side and I'm going to end up, we're going to have Tent City in Central Park. I mean, there were really dramatic sort of apocalyptic, views of what New York might look like at that time. And, that morning of waking up to Lehman Brothers and all of everything happening, which felt very fast. So I think my memory of that time was being grateful that there was a lot of work happening in aviation, but a lot of what was going on was more in the background and personally, and figuring out what life was going to be like and what the city was going to look like after that shift. So again, and I do think there are some similarities to what we're dealing with right now as far as the uncertainty, which hopefully provides some good, some confidence that we are a resilient people, we're a resilient industry, and that change is not something we should always be so terrified of.
Well, fair enough. Let's talk about the current events. Can you provide maybe an overall perspective of how you're thinking about our current situation and maybe some of the horizon of how you see it unfolding, of us getting back to a more normal or more to a new world that we're heading?
So sure, with me, I was going to say booking a flight on United, Pam.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the true test. I think that for me, having seen my own professional life change after ILFC, Shani and I did different things. So I initially went to go be the CFO of a startup aircraft lessor that ended up not starting. And then I went to work on behalf of CIT, again, as you mentioned, helping them sell their aircraft leasing business to Avalon. And then I helped out my friends at Plainview Partners in a number of their different consulting opportunities. And then finally, I became more civically minded and sort of did a couple of little things, including be a traffic and parking commissioner for the city of Beverly Hills. So I sort of stepped in then to this opportunity at United, which was such an amazing option for me. And I'm so thrilled that I got the chance to be where I am today, because I think that my experiences of coming from what was a very solid enterprise, who then had all sorts of roller coasters, as we talked about, and then trying a number of different things personally, gives me a very broad view about what success can mean in the post-COVID world. And I think all of us can think about changes that we've endured in our lives, milestones that we've met, things that we've done, and sort of remember that we can change and we can grow and we can pivot. And we don't know what post-COVID is going to look like, but we know there will be a future. And whether you sort of stay that corporate course, which I veered away from and then was lucky enough and happy enough to come back to, Shani also, and she can talk about it more, has been able to maneuver through so many different things that I think gives her the confidence to know that whatever happens, there will be a way to get through it. I mean, whether you talk about the fact that Shani has passed the bar in 4 different states, which I hadn't realized that, you do have to work. It doesn't just happen. There are times when things do happen, and there are times when you have to make things happen. And yes, we are all being buffeted by so many different forces, but the opportunity to find different ways to think about things in our business and professional lives, I think will serve us well, and we should take them as opportunities, because there will be a post-COVID industry, and it will be strong, but it will be different.
Shani, how about yourself? How are you looking at the current situation?
Thank you for the bar exam shout out. And just for the record, it's not supposed to be a merit badge. It's actually more of a, realizing or pointing out that I've made some life decisions that wasn't very good planning of where are you going to live and where should you be taking the bar exam. So just want to make that note. Anyway, no, I agree. And I think it's interesting right now, again, talking to people in different positions. I know Pam and I have spoken about this, that she can't wait to be able to be back in the office. And there is such an important part of being around your colleagues or being around other counterparties or whatever it is, and having that physical presence, which I think is true. I think for, again, sort of comparing or contrasting my role as a service provider and working for clients, I think this has been a good window into the flexibility that we do have and are able to work with each other and on transactions, even when we're in very different places. And funny enough, I was thinking about this, even though we're not all physically present with each other anymore, there is, I think, an interesting aspect to this time in our lives, and probably, I'm not sure one that will ever be recreated, that we're all distant, we're far apart. But look, I'm looking into Pam's, guest room. I'm looking into Kostya's, I think, kitchen or dining room. There's this intimacy that actually, strangely enough, we've gained, whether it's a kid walking in the back of the room when you don't expect them to come into a work call. there's a strange opportunity, I think, for people to get more personal connections to each other, even though we can't be physically together. So I do think there's an opportunity there. And again, for me personally, it's been nice to explore, I think, some creative solutions with clients and counterparties of how we can move transactions forward, even though we can't meet in person. For example, yesterday I was on a lease negotiation that 100% would have been in person 6 or 8 months ago. And yesterday it was a very long conference call, but we met on, Teams, and we did the whole bit, and it's moving along just fine. So I do think, and on that note, I think, Kostya, part of your question was about what do we see on the other side of this? And I am starting to see new deals and deals with, deliveries happening in even fourth quarter of this year. I'm seeing a lot happening in 2021. So I think that there's more confidence than there was even 3 or 4 months ago about we're getting over some sort of hump here. We're moving forward, and I think there is more confidence in that, and seeing, I think, some really interesting opportunities for players in the market about how to capitalize on the changes that we'll see out of COVID.
Absolutely. Post 9/11, the industry did something extraordinary. We've created a security infrastructure that we today take for granted, and back then was almost unimaginable. There was a lot of fear of whether we can fly, whether it's safe to fly. Then there were concerns about, is the infrastructure too much of a hassle? Do I want to deal with all those lines? And now we just assume this is part of the deal. Pam, do you see something similar happening with medical safety infrastructure evolving because this is probably not our last pandemic. The world is pretty crowded. And so how is United Airlines thinking about how do we deal with these types of risks?
Well, certainly we are very focused on safety. It's key front and center in our core four. And we have been also very clear about the science that supports that safety. And in our partnership with Clorox and Cleveland Clinic, and making sure we make our aircraft as safe as possible using the cleaning tools that we have, both before anyone gets on the airplane, while they are getting on the airplane, by keeping our APUs running, as we are all very aware of the way that the air with the HEPA filters flows through the airplane, requiring everyone to mask up throughout the entire process coming into the airport, onto the airplanes. We believe that, again, you sort of train yourself as to how to get through this. That's what it feels like at the beginning. We're getting through it. And then, as you said, it sort of just becomes a matter of fact. We all want to be safe. We all want to be able to go places, to see our families, to see our friends, to go on vacations, and to do business. We all want to be able to do business in person. I do believe that where we can. And so putting those protocols in place for today and for the future is something that we will work with and that we will continue, because we are going to rely on the science and keeping our customers and our employees safe. And that's really our focus. So there is absolutely a way forward. And I remember after SARS, I happened to go to China. I was in Tiananmen Square when it was empty, because the WHO had just lifted the warning for SARS. And I remember getting off that airplane, and there was a full, temperature screen that I had to go through to let me, out of the airport. So, some people are already used to that in different parts of the world. We'll see what happens in the United States. I don't know, but certainly we are, again, flexible. And whether we're flexible as passengers or as aviation executives or employees, we will figure out the best way forward.
So instead of the Superman lights, you have Clorox shades.
We will see. We will see what those opportunities are for
Brand
cross
new
promotion.
opportunity. Okay. Shani, can you talk a bit about, do you see any meaningful changes in the legal infrastructure, or some of the things that are percolating as a consequence of the pandemic that we're undergoing?
I do, in that I think there are a lot of provisions in lease documents or in financing documents that whenever there's a crisis, they all of a sudden get a new breath of life, or sometimes it's that boilerplate in the back that you've ignored for the past 10 years. And now you're reading that force majeure clause a little more carefully. Like, wait a minute, does this pandemic qualify as a force majeure? And does this give me some sort of contractual out? So I think, probably not unlike most other big crises or changes in the industry, those types of questions and that type of closer examination of legal clauses is popping up again. Material adverse effect, I think, is one that really freaked out people back with the financial crisis. Most MAEs had never really been triggered before, and even if people were performing under their debt documents or their lease documents, you had this fear that a scared lender, or a lender that was having its own credit issues, might invoke one of these clauses, even though you were otherwise performing. And I think there's a reexamination on that again. There are some other issues. There's one that I'll be discussing in another forum next month that I think is an interesting one, about what is the extent that leasing companies can speak to each other in the context of, or coordinate, I should say, within the context of antitrust law, for example, of what are we doing with our various operators and what types of deals, what are you seeing in the market, and if and when that crosses a line that's violating competition or antitrust laws. So I think that's an interesting one, because this is obviously such a widespread issue across the industry of dealing with operators and airlines needing deferrals, for example. And how are leasing companies, or are they, and how are they coordinating their responses on those issues? I think that one's going to be very interesting to see.
I agree. Given that some of the lessors are taking equity stakes in the airlines, that's a big one. I agree. A reminder for all the folks in the audience, if you're interested in asking any of the questions, you have a question button there, so feel free to lob it in. Transitioning a bit, our world clearly is different in terms of our ability to interconnect, and some of us that have been in the industry for decades have built up networks, so it makes it a bit easier to engage with people you already know. People that are starting out, it's a bit tougher. Any thoughts or reflection or counsel to all of the younger participants in the industry, how they build their networks, how they can manage their careers, your counsel and mentorship? Pam, maybe we'll start with you, since you are the power mentor, or a designated power mentor here.
Sure. So I'm trying to think about how people have been successful getting to me of late. Now, some of the things that we've done at United Airlines, which I thought was fabulous, was we did sort of a speed networking mentoring event. Now, obviously, that works in real life. It could work virtually as well, something to think about, where basically you are paired with, on the outside of the table are all of the management folks, and on the inside of the table are all of the newly hired or up and coming employees, and you have like 3 to 5 minutes with each person, and everyone rotates. So it is speed dating, but it's for mentoring. And in fact, when we did it the first time at United, I did get a number of connections, which actually helped me as much as helping them. Because for me, I was a new employee, so I learned a little bit more about some of the different things that folks did. Separately, people have gotten to me through connections that they've seen on LinkedIn, if they're not already tied into the industry so that you can see if it's a first or a second connection. You can use someone to help you reach out. It is hard for someone to just send you an email um, and believe that you're going to get a lot of access that way. Certainly, if somebody said, "I saw you on ISTAT chats," blah blah blah, and reached out that way, um, that is a way. You've got to try it, and I think that's it. Because if you're looking for opportunities to just speak with someone and ask them about their path or ask them a specific question, do anything you can, try something. I don't know if there is some, I don't know if being goofy and creative really works anymore, but being thoughtful and sincere, and knowing that you're actually thinking about what you want out of that conversation, that you have a plan so that the people you're calling or emailing understands that there's a real request and that you're serious, I think is important. So be sincere, be serious, and really have a reason for reaching out to that person. That would be my suggestion.
So that's insightful. Well done. Thank you. Shani, how about yourself?
Sure. I think zeroing in again on our overall theme of finding opportunity and change, I think there is a really unique opportunity right now for someone more junior in their position, whereas before, pre-COVID, it might have been difficult to get approvals to go to a conference, for example, or to have the expenditure of expenses to go to an event or travel. Right now, there are so many opportunities, including all of the opportunities that ISTAT is offering, to get out there, be involved, put something in the Q&A to put your name out there, volunteer to do some sort of virtual conference or participate in something of your company. Again, this is actually kind of an ideal time for those junior people to be able to be at the forefront of showing their faces in front of their fellow industry players. So that's my biggest advice, in addition to everything that Pam said. I think LinkedIn, it's not, I'm not great at utilizing it, but wow, that's an incredible resource. And I have, people have reached out to me that have been some really interesting connections. And I think that's a great way to try and connect with people.
I think that cool. In this world, you almost, if you are an introvert, you almost have, you're on a level playing field with people who are extroverts, because what I would say is, if we were going to a real life ISTAT event and somebody sees Shani and me chatting, I would say, just come up and say, "Hello, I don't know anyone here. I'd love to meet you." If you're not an extrovert, that your head would explode before you could do something like that. So it is a much easier way for a certain cohort to come out and be able to meet folks in an online or virtual setting. So I think this may be a good opportunity for people who otherwise might not have the resources, as Shani said, the money or the ability to travel, but have now the opportunity to just send an email. It's a lot safer than going in and saying hi.
I think very true. Well, listen, we want to make sure that we have an on-time arrival. I am very grateful to both of you. I'm a big fan of both of yours, so being part of this conversation was a treat for me. And so thank you to all of you, and thank you to all the folks that have signed in. And with that, please join us for the future ISTAT chats. And Pam, wish you and the United Airlines all the luck. And Shani, good luck, and thank you for your help in navigating the lessors and the airlines through this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.